Yeah, I
Right.
mean, obviously, where we wanted to start the conversation was talking about the vaccine mandates and finally seeing that going away here at the federal level. That's been a long time in coming. Um, I know it was at I think it was at the March for Life prayer service that we had here in Ottawa a couple of weeks ago, talking to a fellow that I had run into in Ottawa when all the Freedom Convoy stuff was happening here. And at the time, I had said to him something to the effect of, I expect, and I think I've said this to you too, Ryan, at the time, that I expected the Prime Minister to be gone by the end of March. Um, that did not turn out to be true, and so apparently I owe him $1 or something, or maybe a coffee. I'm not sure, but he made it very clear that I still owed him for that. So, um, but there was a thing there where and the results of that obviously are have been the widespread removal of vaccine mandates, at least at the provincial levels, right? The provincial governments did by pretending like it had nothing to do with it, but they did use that as a means of removing the vaccine mandates and a lot of the a lot of the COVID related restrictions that were in place during that time. I mean, if you go back to January of this year, we were under pretty strict lockdowns again, right? I feel like people have forgotten that. But in the meantime, the world has changed pretty significantly in their response to this based on a whole bunch of different reasons. And yet we still have our prime minister in place. And but yeah, so basically right now, I think what we saw with the vaccines mandates, and I think you pointed to this a little bit too, is just this fact that the government has continuously been just sticking to their talking points, regardless of what people are saying to them, right? Whether it's public concern, whether it's, in this case, it was, we had airlines, we had hotels chains, we had airports even speaking out against the vaccine mandates, particularly. And just to clarify, the federal government had control over a lot of the inter country travel, right? Like, so you're talking trains, planes, buses, those sorts of things. So it certainly hindered a lot of people from being able to do what they could do. So
Well, and you have right now a situation where even the mayors of border cities are still asking for the removal of the ArriveCan app as
right.
well. So if you
Yep.
if you are vaccinated, you can leave and go to the states. You still have to have the ArriveCan app. The ArriveCan app means you have to show a bunch of different things to border guards when you come back into the country. You have to do the same thing when you're at airports, and so that even though the vaccine mandate has been removed, the ArriveCan app hasn't been removed, and so that's still causing issues at the airports and at border crossings. And now you got mayors coming out saying, like, let's get rid of the ArriveCan app, and it seems like a little bit was given today or this week, or a lot even, the removal of uh,
Well,
the need
listening
to
to
have
press conferences and statements in question period from the government even a week ago, they had this was, their teeth were being pulled out in order to make this happen. And I think
yeah,
that increasingly that was the case, is that the government was increasingly looking just vindictive. Like, there was no way for them to get around that, right? That
yeah,
they were just doing this to stick it to people that disagreed with them.
yep.
And that was becoming increasingly hard for them to get around with just their typical talking points, as much as they tried to. But I think
Well,
it's worth celebrating this, right? We could be pessimistic, and I'm sure we will be in a few minutes. But I'm trying to dwell on this moment a little bit and just say, look, we were able to see the successful end to this campaign. ARPA was part of that as well, to some degree, and just encouraging grassroots action to send in easy mails to MPs and that sort of thing to remove these restrictions. And it did affect a lot of people's lives. It made life very difficult for a lot of businesses. I mean, even I think I said this a couple of weeks ago in a quick updates, but just the fact that we've had schools coming here for their school trips and being unable to access the Parliament buildings for tours. And so what they have to do is just wander around on the lawn because, maybe half the students are vaccinated, half are not, or whatever the case might be. And so they've just had to make a policy that they're not going on these tours because the government is refusing to allow them inside, right? And these are the institutions that are supposed to represent us, right? These are, your grade 8, grade 10 Ottawa trips, where these are potentially the future leaders and politicians of our country. And yet this is the welcome they're getting when they come here. It's pretty incredible.
One we saw 2 weeks ago, MP Kathy Wagenthal was all but removed from the parliamentary precinct. She
Yep.
wasn't allowed to be there. There's
Well,
a
they
handful
basically
of other
chased her out.
MPs.
I think she
Well,
had to get out before they chased her down, pretty much, right? And then they had these stories of, and I saw one of the staffers actually showed it to me on their phone when they were going through one of the security checkpoints, and they had literally a big full 8 by 11 picture of Kathy behind their desk to make sure she didn't get in. What's that about, right?
and we really did get to a point, and you, I don't think it's defensible in any way, shape, or form. It was no longer about what was a public health issue. It became a partisan issue, and it's unfortunate that the federal government decided to play politics with a public health issue. It was indefensible, and it became indefensible to the point that they had to blink this week, and we're grateful that they finally did. And
Mm-hmm.
not just for folks that want to get on a plane and see family members through the summer, but also, like you had mentioned, a number of people that got their jobs back this week, and
Yeah.
that's amazing. That's great. So
Yeah,
happy
one
to hear
guy I
that for
talked
these
to who
folks.
was working in government, he literally got a phone call an hour later after the press conference. Like they called him within an
Wow.
hour and were like, "Hey, you can come back on whatever day it is, Monday, I think." Um, it's like, okay, so the reality here is that just proves two things. One, they actually did value your work and your contribution to the team. And maybe two, they hated the fact that they were doing that. I mean, these bosses, in a lot of cases, especially the immediate bosses of these individuals who've been laid off, have had long-term relationships with their employees. And I know talking to one guy who was put in that situation, they hated having to make these decisions, right? But they had no choice. And two, it just shows that there was no public health issue for those workplaces. It was primarily just, you guys are not doing what we say, and therefore we're going to boot you. And that's pretty unique when it comes to employment law, and to, that you can do that for something like a vaccine. Now, I know the military is a little bit different than that. There's some, we don't need to get into that, but I think the military, that those rules are still in place. But
Yeah,
um,
there's a couple areas where it needs to clear up yet, and
yep.
and yet we can be happy that it's moving forward. I think you noted in quick updates this week. I just want to reiterate, encourage people to, if your MP was one that took up the cause, maybe fire them
Mm-hmm.
an email or an easy mail saying thank you for your hard work on the issue. There was a number of MPs in the House that were pressing this issue almost on a daily basis. Maybe consider sending them a message. But I also think, and we were talking about this earlier the week, um, forgive me that my cynical antennas kind of go off on the same day that it was announced that they would be removing the vaccine mandates, or some of the vaccine mandates, or most of them.
And just
There
full
was
disclosure,
also
I stole this idea from Ryan and included it in my soliloquy on quick updates. So do credit. I should have had an asterisk there, but anyway.
no, I don't need that. We're a team, but I did kind of say, I did say that, the same day that these mandates were announced that they were coming away, that there was an announcement that the Heritage Committee, who was meeting on Bill C11 being the, we affectionately called it the Internet Censorship
Yeah.
Act, um, but it's an act to give the Canadian the CRTC, Canadian Radio Television Corporation, I don't know, the
Yeah.
Broadcasting Corporation, the ability to, which is a government body, the ability to regulate what's going on online. And so this Bill C11, you've heard us talk about it before. We had a number of calls to action on it recently. And so again, the same day that the mandates were largely taken away, there was a decision to limit the debate in committee for this bill. So Minister Pablo Rodriguez made the decision that there would only be 6 hours of debate on amendments. Now, some might say, hey, that's normal, that's good, that's fine. But what most people don't realize is there was around 170 amendments that were put forward on this bill. So you had experts, you had content creators that were concerned about the content of this bill. specifically around it's called section 4.2, and section 4.2 touches on individual user content creation, or user content that's uploaded to the internet. And
User
people are
generated content.
concerned, yeah, and people are concerned that content will be censored or could be censored by the CRTC. And people are legitimately concerned because while the Minister Rodriguez says, yeah, no, it won't be, it won't be, it won't be, it's clearly stated in the bill that it can be. And the head of the CRTC himself, during the committee meetings, when he was testifying there, he said that it could be. So you had a lot of people
Well,
arms up.
just to clarify a couple of terms there. So when we're talking about censorship, we're not talking about, the government coming in necessarily and like slapping a warning label on something like they did with COVID-19 related things. So what we're talking about is the fact that this bill actually gives the power. It's effectively like, if you think about Russia, Soviet Russia or China or whatever, like they've created these bodies that effectively are the censors, right? They talk about that in terms of political science and things like that. That you have these bodies that work as censors to ensure that the content that's getting down to the people on the ground is government approved, effectively, right? And so they're censoring out content that they don't want their people to see. So what that doesn't mean is that they're necessarily going and looking at your every individual post, but there's an element here in which they're creating standards and guidelines for what that content looks like, right? And so they're basically saying it's going to be the role of the CRTC to put in place these requirements that include the promotion of things like gender identity and gender expression, which they've also added into this legislation as well as a diversity of Canadian content, francophone content. Like it's a quite wide ranging. And so the question is, like the CBC, for instance, or CTV, or whatever the case might be, they're under for their cable broadcasts or their television broadcasts, they're under very specific restrictions as to what percentage of that content comes from where, right? The problem's going to be, okay, what about your church, right? Your church is putting out content every week, a couple of hours usually, sometimes more depending on what kind of content you're putting out during the week. Is the government now going to be able to come in and figure out whether you're meeting their quotas on different, diversity statements or on gender identity or any of these sorts of things, right? And that becomes the problem. Is they're going to very easily then, and we were talking about this earlier too, this trifecta of bills between C11, this creating of the censorship capability, the hate speech legislation that they've been talking about, which hasn't yet come through, and of course Bill C4, which was the conversion therapy legislation, which effectively, as Andre puts it, is a ban on converting to Christianity in some sense. So that's where those concerns really come from with this bill. It's not, to me, it's not even so much about the, whether or not you as a user can post something and it's going to get taken down. It's a bigger problem than that in some case.
But the other side of it is there's and like you said, they're not going to have people likely running around watching videos and to take them down. However, there could easily become a complaint-based mechanism put in place. So again, when you think of something like Bill C4 and a church's teaching, biblical teaching on gender and sexuality, maybe somebody comes across a sermon that they don't particularly care for, and there's a complaint put to the CRTC. Can they remove that, or have YouTube remove it? Those things can happen as well. And I think so. That's where some of the concerning elements come into play when you're talking about Bill C11. And so we have Bill C11, and they're debating it in the committee because it's already passed second reading in the House. They're debating it in the
well, and it's had
committee.
A huge amount of public feedback too, right? Like, I mean, talking about bills that get public attention. I mean, we've had numerous articles in almost every newspaper you can think of where they're talking about concerns about this, right? And it seems like the only people who are really in favor of it are the CBC, CTV, the public broadcasters associations, and maybe some small organizations that have been already given government contracts for other things on cable networks and things like that, right? And they're like, well, here's a perfect opportunity for us to get our reach broadened even further without spending any of our own money. So
Well,
there's that, but yeah, again, like I say, it's been a really strong level of opposition, and it just seems to me, and this is a pattern we saw. We talked about the vaccine mandates. We talked about some of the other legislation too. It just seems like the government doesn't care. They don't care about the level of opposition, and it's becoming this sort of I wouldn't say, maybe not tribalism, but just this, you're not part of our group, and so therefore we're not going to do anything for you.
we don't have to we don't have to listen to you. We don't have to listen to other
Yeah.
experts in the field.
We can call you names, whatever.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you got guys like Michael Geist, who's an expert
Yep.
in this kind of law, coming out very strongly against this. He's got a couple of articles out this week talking about how even how they acted is just an affront to democracy as well. But you even had the former chair of the CRTC come out and
Mm-hmm.
set off
Peter
red flags,
Menzies.
going, yeah, he was
Yep.
saying like, hey, this is problematic. What you're doing here is problematic. And like you say, it seems like they just don't care. They continue to move forward, and push it forward. And that's exactly what happened this week. 170 amendments were put forward. And then Minister Rodriguez, he limited the debate to only 6 hours, which means only a handful of amendments actually got to be debated. And about 150 were just automatically voted on. And they're not in the public record. So it's even hard for us to be able to go and track down, well, what were some of the amendments that they voted on.
Yeah, I was trying to
And that
watch the Parleview content to see what they were doing, and it's all they're approving blocks of amendments at one time, and it's kind of crazy. They
and
were
yeah,
running
just
out of
voting on
time.
these massive blocks because
Yeah.
because he had arbitrarily decided that he wanted to have this wrapped up during this sitting of the parliament, and so that it could get jammed through the committee and go back to the House for third reading before
Well,
Parliament.
and he personally has been getting a lot of public criticism too, right? And that's to say nothing about the whole thing around Marco Mendicino, but these government ministers seem to be talking out of two sides of their mouths lately. Where Mr. Rodriguez, I should say, he was saying that this bill has nothing to do with user-generated content, and then literally a
Yeah,
couple days later, in questioning the chair of the CRTC, who will be the guy in charge of this bill effectively once it passes into law, he said, "Oh yeah, no, that's certainly within our purview." And it's incredible to me, just zooming back again a little bit to look at all these issues together. The Emergencies Act is another example of that, where the government seems to be saying two things, and they're just willing to say whatever it takes to defend their actions. And
I'm wondering if there's
it's
an
hard to
element
say
here.
whether they're not lying or whether they're just it's simply a question of, we've got the power, and therefore whatever it takes to get our goals through is worth it.
But I'm wondering if there's an element of trying to just get something through so we stop talking about it. So
Yeah.
so in the case of C11, everybody keeps talking about how terrible this legislation is, and there's a bunch of concerning elements in this legislation, and that if they just made a couple tweaks here and here, it wouldn't be such a big deal. And they're just saying nope, nope, nope. But the faster we can get this through, the less I got to answer to it, the less we got to talk about it, because what often happens is people stop talking about it once it's jammed through. Case in point, C4. People aren't really talking about, unless you're like us and people that are, you know, yeah, really concerned about it in the immediate future. People aren't talking about it. Nobody's asking questions of the legislatures, the legislators about C4 anymore. Nobody's really asking questions from the media. They don't answering questions. So, maybe there's an element of, hey, if we can just get this done, then I got to stop talking about it. I don't have to talk to media about it anymore, and
Mm.
I'll have accomplished what I wanted to accomplish.
Oh, that's definitely what it is. I think it's they've got the summer coming up. They've got the summer break next week. They've got their last week of sittings, and that's really what they're counting on. It's just that people forget about this.
Well, the interesting thing is this bill was first introduced in November, and it's kind of sat
Well, it's the
around
second
for
rendition of
long.
this bill too, right? It's C10 was the first one in the previous
Yep.
parliament before the election. Even got the
Yep.
same kind of criticism, and then they brought it back and argued that they had fixed the problems, but it was virtually the same.
Yep.
But yeah, I
Yeah.
don't know. I think it's interesting to see the way the public discussion is going on this, because it seemed even just a couple of weeks ago that Justin Trudeau was in a very solid spot politically, that he wasn't going anywhere. I mean, we were talking about this too, right? We're looking at, with the NDP government propping them up, it could be 2025 before we see another election, which is kind of scary based on the rate of change that's been going on so far. But on the other hand, I'm starting to see more and more comments from within the press and even just behind the scenes that there seems to be a dwindling support for him within even the Liberal Party at this point. That and we saw that during the Freedom Convoy to some degree. There were a couple of the Liberal MPs that actually held pressers to comment on the fact that they thought the way that it was being handled, the way that they were dividing Canadians one from the other, was un-Canadian to do. And I think that sentiment is growing within the party, or at least that seems to be the way it's being portrayed in a number of places. There was a CTV article too, right, a couple days ago, where Don Martin was commenting on the fact that it seems like Trudeau has sort of overshot his success on some of these things, right, and on COVID and holding on to the vaccine mandates for as long as he did, and now the repercussions of using the Emergency Act at the time that he did too, right, is starting to come back and bite him. So, going back to that original discussion, maybe my bet about Trudeau being gone by March, end of March, wasn't totally wrong. Within 6 months, I got a 6-month window, don't I?
Yeah. Yeah. 6 months, 6 month either way, 6 month either way. I think it's interesting. Like, I think it's really interesting if you're paying attention to the media, your legacy media, I'll say, of course, there's some newer media that have been calling him out for quite a while. But like you mentioned, a Don Martin article about, is this the fall of Justin Trudeau, or has it begun? There's more criticism for even star ministers like Minister Freeland. I read an article today. She's supposed to make an announcement today talking about what the government's plans are to combat inflation. And her way of combating inflation was to infuse another $7 billion into the economy, not realizing it seems our finance minister doesn't realize that that's what has caused infusing too much money into the economy at too fast a rate. Just creates money in the economy and not enough goods for people to purchase. And that just causes a rising, it's supply and demand causes rising cost of whatever goods people are trying to buy. So adding more money to the marketplace isn't going to solve an inflationary issue. It sounds like you're being wonderful to help offset some extra costs that people are having by, bumping up the Canada Child Tax benefit, by bumping up old age security and all those fun things.
Well, and I think what they're up against, though, too, is the fact that the Bank of Canada is talking about increasing the rate of interest, right? And I think or the interest rates. And I think that there's an element there where that almost needs to happen in order to combat inflation. And yet the government is concerned about the way that that's going to be perceived by people, right? It's going to make life more challenging in a lot of ways, right? It's taking the pain off of the items you're buying and putting it onto the mortgage you're holding and onto the car loan that you have and all these sorts of things, right?
And the reality is, we're at a point where our electorate has no desire to have decisions made that are good for them. They only want to have the decisions made for them that they want to have made for them. Right? Exactly. If they're gonna be
painful in the short term. It's like, well, that's not what we asked the government to do. So change.
Ask any parent. At some point, you have to make decisions for your family that your children aren't going to jump up and down about. And yet it's the right thing for your family to do. Think about, moving and taking a job in a different area, and your kids aren't excited about it, but for a fact that that's the right thing for your family. That's what leaders need to do. And so you have a scenario where the government doesn't want to seem like they're not doing anything, but instead of doing the right thing, they do the wrong thing, so that the perception is that they're doing what they can to help out families and infuse more money, get more money to people so that can offset the cost of their groceries, that can offset the cost of the gas in their gas tank, that can offset even rising mortgage costs. But all that's going to do is continue to exacerbate the problem. I read recently that
a runway of a couple of years like this before their 2025 election, what are they going to do?
Right. And exactly
they're going to own
what's going
this.
to continue to happen. and
Yeah.
and and so I think you are starting to see some cracks, like you noted. Minister Freeland's getting some flack. The Prime Minister is getting flack.
Hmm.
Marco Mendicino is getting flack. What's his title again? Public Safety Minister.
Yeah.
He's getting flack around the use of the Emergencies Act. He said that police asked for it. Police have said they haven't asked. They didn't ask for the Emergencies Act to be invoked. So you've got differences there, and then you've got ministers like Rodriguez getting flack for his handling of Bill C-11. You've got uh, um, uh, the transport minister getting flack about issues around the airports.
Oh, Gabra. Yeah.
Yeah, it's happening. It is happening all over. So you do wonder what that does for the NDP. Does the NDP, say that they want to hitch their horse to this cart
Especially at
all the
this
way till?
time. It seems like terrible timing in some sense.
Well, and there is open conversations about that costing the NDP in the Ontario
Right.
election.
Yep.
That the decisions of the federal party have had a huge impact on the people of Ontario, especially in the Greater Toronto area, Brampton area, where they
Hmm.
they were shut out of Brampton. They had three MPPs there; those were removed in favor of PC MPPs.
Right.
So you've got to wonder how long the NDP and Jagmeet Singh can kind of hang on to things until they get to a point where it just becomes untenable for them as a
Hmm.
party as well.
Yeah. Well, and so it's interesting you talk Ontario politics there because I think one of the comments we'd made too about the reason the Liberals also didn't do very well in the provincial election was made that promise that everyone in primary schools would be in elementary schools and up or whatever age it was, I can't remember exactly, but that they would be required to be vaccinated for COVID-19 in order to attend school. And it seemed to me that that was sort of the point at which things changed for him in terms of the swing in the polls. And I do wonder because you also sent that article to me yesterday about the fact that the Liberal government is going to be changing the vaccine, the what qualifies as fully vaccinated to include the booster shots, right? And so them doing that again, it just looks to be a little bit like they're doing this to prove that they really, really did not want to get rid of the vaccine mandates for whatever reason. That they're turning around and saying, okay, now we're going to require 3 or 4 shots in order, if these things come back, which maybe they will, who knows? And that's where we talked about being pessimistic. Where this may come back, and then in order for you to actually fly or to work or whatever the case might be, you'll need that 3rd or 4th vaccine. So I do wonder how that's all going to play out too. I mean, the summer it will be interesting to see if people start forgetting about these things or not, and whether or not another wave or whatever. Again,
Well, it's hard to
predict.
it's hard to trust whether the announcement of, okay, we're going to remove the mandates for now, but we're also going to have a real concerted effort to get more third doses for Canadians, because I think we're hovering only around 50% or so across the country,
Right.
and so they want to have a concerted effort to go to third doses. So it's really hard to understand if their preference was actually to go up and say no. You need third doses in order to have a proper proper vaccine passport. But they couldn't do that because there was only about 50% of Canadians. I could be wrong on that number; it could be up to 60% or whatever. But you would have a significant a greater number of people that don't have a booster dose, and now all of a sudden, what impact does that have on tourism? What impact does that have on an airline industry that's already been decimated over the last couple of years? And so is it, hey, we'll remove the mandates now, but we'll give people time to get a third dose so that in the fall we bring it back? And I'm not trying to fearmonger, because I'm wondering if that's one side of it. The other side of it is, we're going to talk strong about third doses, so that we can't look like we capitulated in this
Mm-hmm.
moment and removed the mandates, and we're going to talk big and heavy about more, so that's what we say now as the mandates are removed, and then as the summer the conversation dies down and nobody picks up the conversation again in the fall. That's also a very real possibility as well. Look like you didn't capitulate, the conversation dies down, and then come the fall, nobody picks up the conversation again because nobody's looking for these things to come back then either. So yeah, there's a lot going on. We can speculate about a lot of different things as we kind of head in the summer. But ultimately, back to C11. C11 has gone through the committee. It's going to go back to the House, and the House will likely. We're assuming they'll likely pass it at third reading, and then it heads over to the Senate. So, if you want to kind of take it from there, what can people expect moving forward, Colin?
Yeah, and I mean, it's the other thing I was thinking about is that we haven't actually touched on medical assistance in dying and the discussion around that too, which has also created some controversy amongst the disability communities and that sort of thing, and specifically on the mental health side of it. But yeah, to wrap up, I think I just encourage you all to take part in that process. The C11 discussion is going to keep going. I don't think, like you say, Ryan, that it's going to wrap up before the summer's done in the Senate specifically. They've got too much runway for that. So between C11, send in an easy mail to your member of parliament asking them to vote against Bill C11 at third reading. We'll have some action items coming out as well when it goes to Senate and however the Senate deals with that as well. So keep your eyes open for that. And through the summer, too, again, going back to the Care Not Kill campaign, which, as I say, we haven't touched on really, but that's an action item that we'd love to see you take part on as a federal campaign. We've got the flyers that you can order on our website. We hope to have a couple of other items rolling out for larger displays, bus ads, and things like that as well into the fall. So keep your eyes open for that. But
I just want to interject there. If you are a Conservative Party member, and you're going to see a lot of those leaders through the summer as well, I'd encourage you to ask the question of the Conservative Party leaders.
On all these issues. Yeah.
Well, that's what I mean, and they've been somewhat quiet on the issue of medical assistance in dying and mental health issue, and we'd love for that to become more of an issue that each of the potential leaders of the Conservative Party take a stand on. It's a rotten clause, and we're seeing the Senate even bring forward other bills to expand it even more. But this is a rotten clause to include mental health in as an option or as a way to receive assisted suicide, and as such, the Conservative Party leaders or potential leaders should be talking about it, should be making their stance clear on this issue as well. And so, if you're out and about, they're going to be out and about all summer because the leadership doesn't wrap up till September. Ask the questions if you have a chance. Hey, where do you stand on medical assistance in dying and mental health and that provision that's set to kick in March of 2023?
Excellent. Okay. That's a wrap.
Take care.
See ya.